Well, uh, yeah, tonight, Jeff Green, who leads our divest de-sponsor team, Jeff has been working, a lot of you know, on not only the City of Chicago lawsuit against the industry, but other related issues, including climate super funds and just all kinds of things. And we have been assisted by the Center for Climate Integrity. So Jeff is going to be the MC tonight and is going to introduce our friends from the Center for Climate Integrity. And hopefully from that, we'll get some new ideas about what we can be doing for the remainder of this year and into 2026. So I'll just turn it over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, ma'am. The Center for Climate Integrity, CCI, their mission is to support communities in holding big oil accountable for climate deception and the damages that have resulted from the use of their products and that deception. And they've got expertise in a number of areas: law, science, research, communications, all focused on holding fossil fuel companies accountable. Isla Shorenstein, who's one of the speakers tonight, is the political director at CCI, and she's working on things like outreach and engagement of public officials on climate accountability. Justin is the legislative affairs manager at CCI, and he's looking at developing and executing national, state legislative strategy. I will turn it over to them. Isla. So before I do that, what we're going to talk about very briefly: status of current lawsuits that CCI is monitoring, some of the tactics that the GOP is using to turn back the suits judicially and legislatively. And if we have time, Isla's going to talk about, and Justin will talk about, how CCI is engaging on plastics. They've just published a report called The Fraud of Advanced Recycling that I'm sure will speak to a lot of us here on the Zoom. Now, Isla, take it.
Thanks, Jeff. And thank you both, Jeff and Pam and Tom and everyone for having us. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to share my screen, so of course, bear with me for 1 second. All right, just adjust that one little bit. All right, can folks see that okay?
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Oh, and let me find my little slide controller here. That would help. I have far too many tabs open. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit more background on who we are and what we do. And I'm also just gonna you're gonna have to bear with me a little bit as I set up a lot of this work. I know that, especially Jeff and Pam, I know you're intimately familiar with the history of fossil fuel deception, but I am gonna just kind of provide that background just so we're all speaking the same language when we get to the part about just the different tactics and campaign tools that we're using and the solutions that we're presenting. So that's kind of what I'm going to try and get going today. So, like Jeff said, we have a really narrow focus at CCI, which is great because it allows us to really hone in our skills onto a specific issue, and at times, sometimes limiting because we can't work on every issue. But we hold oil and gas companies accountable for their decades of deception, for lying about the climate crisis, and for all of the harm that those lies have caused in the form of more frequent and severe extreme weather events and more. And communities all over the country are using different tactics, such as the lawsuit brought by Chicago, to hold these companies accountable. And so a big part of what we do is also assisting communities in these different efforts. So that's the very broad strokes overview of what we do. But to go in a little bit deeper, and I'm going to even kind of take this another layer down, but we have three main areas of focus. One is really doing additional research because the reality is these companies haven't stopped lying. It just looks a little bit different today. So we do a ton of research to continue to expose all the ways in which these companies are being deceptive about their products and their practices. um, both historically, things that haven't yet been brought to light, and additional ways in which how they're currently misrepresenting their operations. Um, and as part of that, we also want to understand the damage that these lies are causing. So we also do a lot of research into the actual hard dollar amounts of damage that people are experiencing as a result of climate-driven extreme weather events. And then lastly, like I said, we sort of take all of this knowledge and we think about ways in which we can hold these companies accountable, prevent and stop their wrongdoing, but also try to empower people with resources and hopefully try and maybe justice is not the right word, but hopefully bring some kind of recovery to the people who've experienced harm as a result. Um, so I'm gonna start with that first bucket on the big oil and their lies, on big oil and their lies, and just kind of look at what we sort of know broadly to date. So what enables us to pursue these accountability efforts, and just kind of highlight a few of those moments. So the first one I want to highlight is these companies have known back to really the late 1950s, but 1965 is a really key year because this is really when they knew. This was when the president of the American Petroleum Institute, so the front group, the trade association essentially for all of the big major companies, um, they told members, so the members being the big oil companies, that burning fossil fuels could cause marked changes in climate, and there is still time to save the world's people from the catastrophic consequences of pollution, but time is running out. So that's huge, right? I mean, that's not only an acknowledgement of what's happening, but it's of what's to come. And that's a really big piece here. It's that not only did these companies know that burning fossil fuels would contribute to global climate change, but they knew what climate change would do to the people who live on this planet. And so that was a really significant moment in this story. And these companies have gone on to testify at numerous congressional hearings and speak on this. And one of the things they love to do is brag about how great their climate science or their science programs were. And so that's great. That's true. They had some of the best science programs around, and there have been some amazing studies that come out that actually show their projections of how of global temperature rise against the reality of what we've seen, and the lines are more or less indistinguishable. So they were some of the best scientists. And some of these scientists have also since come out to talk about what they were trying to warn the executives. And they were saying, the discussions that were happening at this time between the 60s and the 80s were really, not if there was going to be a problem, but how bad was it going to be? And when was it going to happen? How soon? And how quickly would we start to see this stuff? So, unequivocally, they knew this was going to be a massive problem. Whoops. There we go. Um, and if this all sounds really familiar, it's because it is. They're not the first industry to know about something, lie about it, and to kind of cover up the harm. So they are essentially following the exact same template as big tobacco, down to the same junk scientists, down to the same lawyers who are representative firms representing them. I mean, it is truly wild. They really took a page out of that playbook to try and run this massive deception campaign. You'd think they would have learned, but they didn't. So the late 80s was really this big shift from, okay, we know that this is happening to, okay, we have to do something to stop climate policy so that our bottom line is not affected. And so the 80s were really when they shifted into launching a really big forward-facing deception campaign. And it was multi-millions of dollars, right? We've all been victim of it. We've all seen it. But to lie to the public and to lie to the media. And at that time, it really was about the climate denial. We'll get in later to where it is now, where it's not really denial anymore, right? They've accepted it. Now they lie about the solutions. But back then it was really, it's just too uncertain. This science, I don't know. Why would we just go out on a limb and take such drastic policy swings if we just don't know for sure? So that was really the sentiment of the narrative that they were espousing at the time. And this was, I think, really encapsulated in one of the most famous documents that have been made available to the public, which is another American Petroleum Institute document, and this is their campaign plan, for a lot of this deception work. And you can see right here that they're acknowledging that the um, success of this campaign looks like people doubting science. Average citizens understand these uncertainties, right? They recognize that it becomes part of the conventional wisdom, and it's just we can't take dramatic action until we're more sure. However, at the same time that they were developing these campaign strategies about the scientific uncertainty, they were taking the science super seriously because they were investing a ton of money to shore up their own facilities and their assets and their infrastructure from the impacts of climate change, like sea level rise. And there's tons of reports on this all over the world of them literally lifting up some of their offshore drilling because of sea level rise, and even in other places in some of their Arctic drilling about how, the kind of the like freeze and thaw cycles. It's really pretty crazy. But the point being is while they were outwardly lying to us and to the media and to policymakers about saying, this science, I don't know, it's not happening, it's not us, they were taking it seriously enough to protect their own assets. So that's pretty damning evidence. Um, and so, like I said, right, so that they were in that denial phase for a decade plus, right? Climate change is not happening. But it started to become so obvious. Eventually, finally, it started to become so much a big part of the zeitgeist that they could no longer really ignore that climate change was here and it was happening. So instead of denying it, they started lying about the solutions. And so they also saw another profit motivation, and they have an incentive to keep everyone hooked on oil and gas. So, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to come up with solutions that are tied into us being able to continue to promote oil and gas, like carbon capture, right? As long as we can capture that carbon, we continue to emit. But they've also tried to, I mean, really, they've also greenwashed additional um, types of research. So we saw this with algae, where this sounded like this super great, oh, it's green and it's organic because it's algae. And but in the end, it didn't work because a lot of what they've invested in are not technically feasible. But what they did is they spent more on the ad campaigns advertising algae as a possible solution than they did on actually researching it. So once again, we have a totally deceptive way of conducting business, and a way that they have figured out to continue to lie to position themselves as a player in the solution here. But when it all comes down to it, they're still lying, so they can't really be trusted as a true. Um, they should not be brought to the table on issues of climate policy. And part of this is, I think, ad campaigns that are really targeted at us, especially those of us. I mean, you're all part of Climate Reality Project, and here Justin and I are working for a climate group, people like us who care and want to make sure that we are doing something. But that's so much a part of what they are trying to impart, which is the consumer blame game, that individual responsibility. And I'm sure many of you here know, but for those who don't, BP, they were the ones who came up with the term carbon footprint. They did that with a PR company called Ogilvy in 2005, I think is when they released it, and you can still use it on their website. And at the end of the day, I'm going on to a major oil producer's website to calculate my carbon footprint to feel bad about my choices. That's crazy. But that's a really big part of what they do. And they're doing it with recycling, plastics recycling. And we'll talk about that a little later on. But there really is this push of, if everyone just did their part, we'd be fine. Well, okay, so let's talk about that then. Let's talk about these companies doing their part, because that's going to look a lot different than me. Um, so that sort of is a very, kind of quick and dirty summary of the history of the deception, what it looks like now, and also just kind of how it's starting to make people feel. So I want to transition a little bit because the other piece of this is, okay, what's been the effect of all of those lies and all of the deceit? And what the effect is that climate change is really expensive. The results of what we're experiencing now, it's catastrophic, both in terms of how people are experiencing that harm and also the dollar amount again, not only just in terms of an individual household, but local governments and what they are having to put forward in order to protect municipal infrastructure, state infrastructure, everything. So this is, one out of many, many different kinds of estimates, but this is really this, almost $3 trillion. This is looking at um, all of the billion-dollar weather events that we've seen, majority of which are climate driven, since 1980. But if you look at this on a chart, right, you're going to see those billion-dollar events start to go up and up and up and up as the years go on. Um, and those are just the billion-dollar ones. There are many ways in which we're experiencing these costs. And I will be super curious to hear from you all at some point how these costs are manifesting in your own communities in life. But in Illinois, I know we were looking at just some rough estimates because people aren't there's not a ton of people out here calculating all these costs with that climate frame in mind. But we know that annual flooding losses have been estimated to be about 260 million in Illinois. And then our work, so we try and do different we try and put dollar amounts on things when we can, when there's a model that exists that we can use and we feel that it's credible. We did this with air conditioning because we know all over the country, and particularly in Chicago, Chicago is one of the most affected cities when we did this analysis a few years ago, that schools are shutting down because of extreme heat. I mean, Pam, you were saying it's 90 degrees there today and it's May 15th. Um,
Dependable constipation.
and so that, in order to keep kids safe, schools are shutting down, which of course is creating, the amount of externalities that you then see because of childcare and because of having to then maybe provide food at home and people work. Um, so we wanted to know what it was going to cost, not only to install air conditioning in schools that never necessarily needed it. I'm from the Northeast, so much like Illinois, we didn't necessarily need air conditioning when I was in school. But also, what's it going to cost to operate and maintain that every year? I mean, if you're having to run that, an additional several weeks out of the year, that's a lot of money. So just to install an HVAC system that includes cooling for about 2,000 schools in Illinois that we estimated did not currently have air conditioning, $6.1 billion. And that's just for the initial install costs. So these numbers are gargantuan, and it's because it's not just the recovery, it's not just the extreme weather, it's what are we going to do to keep communities safe. So, we could talk about that all day, but it's astronomical. I also just wanted to flag briefly that we have done specific cost studies in certain, we call them cost studies in certain states where we'll pick a bunch of different impacts and try to estimate those costs. It's a very intensive project. We want to do it for every state. We have not done one for Illinois, but what we have done is produced a memo where we look at all the different ways that climate costs could show up in a municipal budget specifically. So I'll send you a couple links as follow-up, or I'll drop them in the chat a little later. But this one is it's really a bullet pointed list of all the different things that you could think of these costs that we don't call climate costs, but that probably are at this point. So I just wanted to flag that resource. But I also want to make the point that when we talk about all this, I'm not going to be affected the same way as someone else who's not going to be affected the same way as someone else. And that's because, of course, we have, our society is riddled with systemic racism and disinvestment, and redlining policies. And all of these more systemic issues produce vulnerable communities who are dealing with increased air pollution and infrastructure that hasn't been updated. So when a big climate event happens, the people who live in these communities are disproportionately affected, right? If you're already dealing with crumbling infrastructure and poor air quality and access to clean water, then when you get a major flooding event, that's going to hit you harder than someone who's living in a place that doesn't deal with these struggles. So I always just want to call that out because when we think about these damages, we're all going to experience them a lot differently. So now transitioning into the larger part of the conversation today, which is, and I know that was a lot of background and context, but I know we had a little time here and I thought that it would be helpful to just frame it all up because now that we have this a whole bunch of evidence and we understand all the deception and we start to get a feeling for what all of that has done to people and the environment, then we can start thinking about how the solutions that we need to protect people, keep them safe, and, basically help them recover, and who should be responsible for paying for that, basically. Um, so the good news is that nearly 1 in 3 people now live in a place with a climate accountability lawsuit. And I'll talk a little bit more what those lawsuits are. Of course, you all live in Chicago, where there was one that was, what was it, Jeff? It was like last spring. I think it's been a little over a year ago that it was filed. Um, I'm really excited to join you all as of December. I live in Maine, and our Attorney General filed a lawsuit this past December, I think it was. So I've been waiting many years to be one of these people, and now I am. But these lawsuits are being brought all over the country. There are 11 attorneys general, I believe, at this point, and several dozen municipalities. And they are brought very similar to tobacco and opioids, right? It's the same chain of logic. They knew, they lied, they should be held accountable for the damage. So some of these lawsuits are being brought using consumer protection claims. So really, and that's so, for instance, the state of Massachusetts is actively in discovery, or excuse me, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and they have sued Exxon specifically for their lies. But then when you look at some of the community, like it's Charleston, South Carolina, that lawsuit is really, Charleston's dealing with huge amount of sea level rise. So they're including damages. And so these cases vary in terms of their claims and what's available to them state to state. But the underlying mechanism here is to hold these companies accountable, to get them to stop lying, to cover the costs of their of the damages. I mean, those are the big things. And to correct the record. Um, and that's really what is special, I think, about the judicial system and about this solution, which is that courts have the ability to set the record straight so we all can have a common understanding of the truth. So these cases are proceeding to trial, which is really exciting. There has been a huge battle. They have been kicked up and back down and around the corner between federal court and state court. We are happy to have them in state court where they originally filed. There is a argument that it would be easier to dismiss them if they were filed in federal court. So keeping them in state court is critical. I'll go back to that map for a second. Um, and but of course, the companies are terrified of these lawsuits. They saw what happened to tobacco. They saw what happened to opioids. So they are doing absolutely everything they can to try and make these go away, which means that at every single moment along the life of the lawsuit, they are putting up whatever they can. They're filing um, appeals and trying getting and motions to remand. So um, the two places that are the closest to trial right now are Massachusetts and Honolulu, and actually just was joined by Boulder, Colorado, which is really exciting. For the most part, these cases have made it past the procedural hurdles that have been thrown at them. I say most part because there have been a few dismissals that we think will be appealed. Um, but we should hopefully, fingers crossed, we've been waiting for years, start to see these cases actually play out in either a settlement or a trial. And once we see that, we are hopeful that everything starts to move a little bit more quickly. But of course, we're dealing with different state courts and circuit courts all throughout the country. Very briefly on Chicago. So yeah, was filed early or mid last spring. It was a really exciting moment. And Chicago has, and bear with me on the legal terms, because I will admit that I'm our political person, but I'm not a lawyer. But the Chicago lawsuit has been, oral arguments have been heard because what happens is it's filed in state court. The defendants immediately get it removed to federal court. And then you have to make a motion to remand that back down to state court where it was filed, where it belongs. That's the place that we're at now. There have been oral arguments for the motion to remand back to state court, but we are waiting on a decision. So that's where it stands. Chicago will be an interesting one because it is the only lawsuit that has so far been filed in its circuit court. So this will be, if we get a positive ruling, this will be yet another circuit court that has ruled affirmatively that these cases belong in state court and they can proceed. But that's the holding pattern that we're in. So we are waiting for that decision. And once that happens, there will be more procedural hurdles, but those have, for the most part, gone very smoothly going forward after this. So that's where Chicago's at. Um, I am going to turn things over to Justin because you've heard enough from me for now. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We've talked about the lawsuits. We're now going to talk about state legislative approaches because there is a bill that exists in Illinois that we've been partnering with Representative Jimenez on and Senator Ellman, that would also pave the way for individuals to be able to recover their losses via litigation if this bill was passed from the oil majors. So I'm going to hand it to Justin to talk about that, and then I'm going to very briefly chime in just about a couple other legislative concepts that don't exist as bills in Illinois right now, but I thought this group might be interested in. So, Justin, please take it away and just tell me when to switch slides here.
Yeah, and thank you, Isla. So we are dealing with the Extreme Weather Recovery Act, which was introduced this last session in Illinois. This is House Bill 3594, Senate Bill 1790. And why do we need it? Mainly for a few reasons. In July of 2023, like many of you know, Chicago experienced more than twice its average in rainfall. And this resulted in thousands of homes being flooded. Those flood losses in Illinois cost around more than $250 million since the 1980s. And this is highest amongst the United States. In January 2024, there was a severe wet winter storm that left over 70,000 Illinois residents without power. This led to transit delays, flight cancellations, and closed schools, as we touched on before. And touching on the schools, we had talked about schools closing mainly due to the heat index, but also protecting childhood safety. The heat stress is caused by climate change, has reduced corn yields by 23 to 24%. In Illinois by the mid-century, and that is most likely. So really, if you take anything from what I say, extreme weather events are at a cost, and whether it's Chicago, whether it's Springfield, or all over the state, it's very expensive to address these costs, and we believe we have the solution moving forward. So, talked about it briefly, but the main provision in the Extreme Weather Recovery Act is establishing a right of action and who can sue for what. But this private right of action ensures that individuals, small and micro businesses, organizations could have access to the courts and they can pursue legal action to recoup the costs of these extreme weather events that were caused by these big oil companies. Illinois is not new or really not, I would say, unaware of this tactic. We've seen this movie before. An Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act, which was passed years ago, allows individuals to sue companies that illegally collect biometric data. So in the avenue of right of action and really just giving this right to directly to the people, directly to small business organizations, taking out that governmental middleman. This is something that is shown to work, not just in Illinois, but as we've said before, both in holding the big tobacco accountable, but also in addressing the opioid crisis as well. Next slide. So, as I said before, this is House Bill 3594, sponsored by Representative Jimenez, and Senate Bill 1790, sponsored by Chair Ellman. And again, this establishes a right of action, but it also provides resources to recover from the increasingly costly events. Illinois, the last I checked, before budget season got underway, there was a $3 billion deficit. Whether it's Illinois, whether it's New York, Pennsylvania, we have these bills introduced or will have them introduced. States can't really just keep accruing these costs. They cannot fit the bill or front the bill rather, of which FEMA, the EPA, the federal government otherwise would. It is very, very difficult for states to continually address these costs. We also want to protect public resources for core responsibilities. Again, Budgets are stretched thin, and government should not have to bear the responsibility of paying for this crisis, particularly if state governments were not responsible for said crisis. So, really, just trying to address not only mainly the extreme weather costs, but also give the right directly to the people to hold these companies accountable. So, status, we are on the ground floor. This was mainly an educational year, and moving forward after session, it'll be a mainly educational time, but also connecting with on the ground grassroots organizations. This bill is currently, and we are working with and being supported by the Illinois Environmental Council, which I call the nucleus of a lot of climate legislation, but also environmental-based legislation. So I believe we're in the right spot there. But also moving forward, we want to socialize these bills. We want to work with individuals and organizations that are on the ground. We're in contact with the West Side Environmental Justice Alliance, which we believe will help us get in contact with other organizations, not just in Chicago, but across the state. But also, in addition to that, working with Representative Jimenez to gear up a real campaign for next session. Again, this is going to involve a lot of education, a lot of grassroots building, really just making people aware that this bill exists and that this is the most plausible solution to our extreme weather crisis moving forward.
Thanks, Justin. And I saw that there was one question in the chat, which I'm just going to answer briefly because it's a good question and it's something that we thought a lot about when we crafted this legislation, which is okay, but like the average person can't just bring a lawsuit against Exxon, right? Like, how are you going to pay for that? It's a really good question. So we have it structured in a similar way to it's like kind of somewhere between small claims court and regular court, but the idea it's written in such a way as to be similar to the way that the municipalities bring it, which is on a contingency fee basis. So the lawyers get, a percentage of what's won, but there's not an upfront cost to be able to bring it. Of course, that I think is somewhat negotiable, and figuring that out is a bit of a task, and would potentially involve members of the Judiciary Committee weighing in. But the idea is that we are hopefully going to empower anyone, not just people that can afford it. So I think that's a really good question, important one to answer. So very briefly, just going to touch on these other two concepts because they are sort of out there in this climate accountability ether. And so you might hear of them. Whoops, come on here. Okay. We could spend a huge amount of time talking about how the insurance crisis and the climate crisis are one and the same and intertwined. Give me the stage and we'll have that conversation. But for the context of here, I mean, we are seeing rising premiums and non-renewals. And we're actually, in Illinois, insurance companies, I think last year actually lost money, mainly due to convective storms, which does have a little bit of sometimes the attribution science isn't really super strong on that yet. But essentially, we're in this insurance crisis where people are struggling to make sure that their homes are affordable. Insurable and affordable. But we're in this insurance crisis because we're in a climate crisis, and we're in a climate crisis because of big oil's decades-long deception. So that is a tough chain of logic sometimes to communicate because there are two villains here. I mean, the insurance industry is certainly not a friend to many people, but big oil has a role here too. And so I think a big part of this conversation does need to involve big oil's the role that big oil should play in keeping homes insurable. And this is like a silly little way of putting it. But when there is a huge, climate-driven extreme weather, like when we saw the wildfires in LA, right? What is the industry response? Jack up premiums, restrict new policies, so you're only going to cover some things, not all, and cancel a whole bunch of policies or not renew them for the next year. None of those options are acceptable. So what can big oil do? The ones who are perpetrating this crisis, what gap can they fill so that these insurance companies aren't taking out their losses on the ratepayers? That's the really big thing here. We don't want people to have to raise their rate or lose their coverage. And I'll just mention too that there's an amazing amount of work out on this prior to the change in administration. The Senate Budget Committee and a few others had done a big deep dive into this and looking at even by state and by county, just how insurance costs are skyrocketing because of the climate change. So just wanted to flag that as well. There is a bill in California that we worked closely on that does contain a private right of action and is also trying to keep their state-run their state-run property and casualty insurance from insolvency, and also basically enabling insurance companies to subrogate, which means standing in the shoes of their policyholders to recover losses from big oil. So, sadly, the bill died in committee, but it's a 2-year bill now, so we're working on it going forward. And one of the big things our team is doing is really trying to strategize on how do we make this a more simple narrative, and how do we make this just honestly a more simple bill. But a similar one was introduced in Hawaii, and there's some interest in other states. So you might start to hear this conversation come up, and it's something that we might want to consider working into the Extreme Weather Recovery Act, or not, depending on what that calculus is. And then, Justin, you want to briefly touch on anti-greenwashing?
Yeah. So we have another bill that addresses the practice of greenwashing. This is Senate Bill 841, sponsored by Senator May. This is in my home state of New York. And this defines and prohibits the practice of greenwashing in deceptive environmental marketing claims. This also creates a legal cause of action for consumers, organizations, and governmental bodies. And more or less mirroring and parallel to what we, in some of provisions we see in our extreme weather bills as well. This also includes remedies similar to those provided in existing consumer protection laws, not completely rewriting the ship here, but remaining consistent with state statutes, existing laws, but really just want to protect consumers moving forward from those deceptive environmental marketing claims.
Yes, and we talked a lot of the solutions we talked about were really focused on the recovery, but this is just another kind of idea that gets at the lying a little bit. So, wrapping up here, because I do want to pause and then we'll kind of take the temperature, and if we want to engage in discussion, we can do that, or I can kind of give another little
Live or is this a
quick
recording?
work.
Live.
So, I do, and Jeff, I'm glad that you flagged this to talk about, because it is actively happening, which is that all of these ideas and all these solutions sound incredible, and we should just do them all. But of course, we're up against one of the biggest industries known to man, so they've put up quite the fight. And the current administration, of course, is a good friend to big oil. So. They are not going down without a fight. There are a few different ways in which we are witnessing and experiencing attacks on climate accountability. The first is that I mentioned kind of already, right? It's just that these companies are paying law firms a lot of money to fight these lawsuits at every stage they can. So that's just happening in any given administration. But what's changed now is, because of the makeup of Congress and because of this administration, they now potentially have the tools to pass what we call a liability waiver or immunity, which could shield the whole industry from having to pay up or be held accountable. Many industries have attempted to get this signed into law. The only one to be successful, as we know, is gun manufacturers, and that was extraordinarily successful. So this is something we are very nervous about. We've been watching it for years. There have been attempts in the past, but they've never really quite worked. But now we're seeing some real targeted efforts being made. So there was there was an executive order that was signed that basically was directing the Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, to investigate laws and lawsuits that they felt like infringed on American energy freedom. I don't know if I'm even using the right terminology there, but basically it was, hey, go look at all the different climate laws and ways that people are going after big oil, and call them illegal and go after them. So now we're starting to see counter lawsuits. The state Superfund bills, that's another big legislative push that a lot of our partners work on and that we support as well. So a few states that have passed those have now been sued by not only big oil, but by the administration. Hawaii filed a lawsuit 2 weeks ago, which was really exciting. That was hopefully a long time coming. Like, the administration caught wind that they were going to file, and like 2 days before, or maybe the day before they filed, the administration sued Hawaii for bringing a lawsuit that they hadn't brought yet. There's like all these different kind of crazy things. But the biggest thing that we're concerned about is honestly not even these executive orders that may or may not be founded on legal ground. It's whether Congress can pass this liability waiver because there's a lot of different ways they can do it. They can do it through reconciliation, although we haven't seen that language, luckily, yet. But they also can do it through if they get rid of the bird rule, they can do it that way. So there's a lot of it's not easy for them to do, but it's doable. So we're doing a lot of organizing too, just nationally, especially in states that have lawsuits or Superfund bills to try to push their members of Congress to just have a strong spine if any of these types of proposals come their way. And we are, eagle-eyed watching out for those. So that is all to say this is certainly a fight. Um, so I'll close this out. Justin, maybe you can kind of close this out on just the sort of here are the tangible things when it comes to the affirmative offensive campaign style stuff that we need help with, and we hope that folks will engage in.
Yeah, thank you, Isla. Yeah, this is our call to action. If you take anything from what we say, we need support to get these bills moving. And that is in the form of, I would say, number one, co-sponsorship. We need to call on our legislators to co-sponsor 1790, but also 3494 in the House. Without very visible legislative support, oftentimes these bills don't move. As good as they are, as great as ideas they are, in attacking a very out front issue, you need support. And in order to do so, you need co-sponsorships. In order to get co-sponsorships, you need to call on yourselves or even your members to tell these offices that you support this bill. Coalition building. We had mentioned the West Side Environmental Justice Alliance. We want to be put in touch with other groups as well, much like yourself, but also, expanding moving forward, not just in Chicago, not just in Springfield, but again, all over Illinois. We want to hear stories directly from individuals on the ground, people who have been impacted by flooding, people who have been impacted by extreme weather, rising heat temperatures, children, students, whatever the case may be. It's these stories that are really going to connect with legislators, really going to connect with grassroots leaders, and moving forward, really gain traction, not just on this bill, but this overall issue of extreme weather and how much it costs moving forward.
Thanks, Justin. So I want to pause because I know we've been talking a lot at everybody, and that was a lot of information. Jeff, I have, plastics information, but maybe we should just take the temperature if folks want to engage in questions and discussion. Happy to call it here and send some plastics follow-up or take it by ear. Defer to everyone here.
Yeah, let's see if folks have questions at this point, and then depending on how deeply or lengthily we get into that, then we can or cannot do the plastics.
Perfect. Yeah, Rachel, please.
Hi, thanks for the presentation to both of you. I'm really interested in all of these legal avenues for working on this stuff, but I'm just thinking out loud for the first time about this. It strikes me that yes, of course, the fossil fuel companies need to be held accountable. Yes, of course, they're like the center of the problem. But also, they've been enabled for decades by tons of politicians, individually and collectively. Like both major political parties have enabled them in really complex ways. Tons of, public subsidies. Just so many ways in which the politicians on both sides of the aisle have been a big part of creating the problem as well. So I just wonder in conversations about like loss and damage funds and cause of action, is there ever a conversation about how to hold individual politicians or political parties or other kinds of political entities responsible for facilitating us getting to where we are now? Obviously not just the drillers and the processors are at fault.
It is a brilliant question. And I would love to see all of that happen because they're absolute. I mean, yeah, the amount of help that they have had. So the it's probably not going to be the most satisfying answer. So, of course. But yes, that does come up. And the like easy out answer is that it is a slightly different type of law, right? So like our team, we are experts in this very specific thing, which is like deceptive company, like corporate accountability. So that's the space that we occupy. That being said, there are other groups that are working on that sort of like government accountability, especially, and there are existing lawsuits that there is I forget the name of the lawsuit, but it's in Montana. The I think it was the youth group sued the government. It was a little different, right? Because it was about not taking action on climate change, but I do think that's in a similar vein, right? It's like, it's just a different type of accusation. So there is some precedent, I think. But why am I forgetting the name of this group?
Our Children's Trust.
Yes, yes, Jeff, thank you. So I think they're a really good resource. I think that ACE, Action on Climate Emergency, no, yeah, Action on Climate Emergency, I think they also do some very targeted like government and elected official accountability. I just don't know. I don't want to misspeak because I don't know what the legal mechanisms that exist for that type of accountability. Um, and oh, and I guess the other thing is that the defense that they have, which would have to be worked out, is, well, these companies lied to us, right? Which we know that they did. So I think there's a little bit of a like, we have to figure out what that is. But
Yeah, that all makes sense and is really helpful. Thank you. I guess I was also thinking about things like where we have laws on the books that aren't getting enforced or that we're not hitting the goals we set. So, like Illinois set the CEJA goals, we're not on track to meet them. Chicago's made the energy benchmarking ordinance, we're not enforcing it. Like, those are choices.
yeah, Rachel, you just reminded me, Vermont, I don't know if other states have this. I just happen to know Vermont has this, that in their like large omnibus climate bill, that when it was passed, whenever, there is like a cause of action within there that they can act, that I think like citizens can sue the government if they don't meet their climate promises. And I've heard of that kind of initiative before. I just don't know a bunch of them off the top of my head other than that, but that could be another mechanism.
And Rachel, look, if I can just jump in for a second, um, I probably have mentioned this before, but what Pam and I are trying to work on is getting the Cook County State's Attorney hooked up with public citizens and start to work on the feasibility of indicting individuals, heads of climate of fossil fuel companies for some type of murder or reckless endangerment. So that's another avenue that we're looking at, that we're trying to work on, and it's not just us. It's happening, with local prosecutors across the country.
I noticed that Ohio has a hand up.
Sorry. I just have a quick question. Actually, a couple questions, but I'll ask one first, which is, I I definitely understand the deception caused by big oil through the industry and the documentation that they had, the studies that they've been doing for years. At the same time, I think, just through some research, I also have found that like over half of the world's crude oil production is attributable to countries, to nations. The United States being one of the top producers of crude oil. So, with regards to that, like, how does that complicate things? What do we do about that?
Yeah, so I think that the way area that gets complicated, I think, don't quote me on this, I don't represent any of the lawsuits, but is when we're talking about trying, well, I don't even know if how much of a complication it presents because for the damages cases, which is where it would, right? If we know companies have lied, they can be sued. Like, it doesn't really matter what they produced, they lied. But for the damages cases, which are trying to say, your products cause climate change and now we're experiencing a loss from it. So the field of attribution science has like really blossomed in the past few years. And we are seeing specific emissions attribution. So that has sort of been this breakaway, like subsection of the larger attribution science field, where they can actually, to some degree, pinpoint how responsible each company is for things like sea level rise. And so it always sounds really small to be like 1%, but 1% of sea level rise is like ridiculous. So I think without knowing exactly the perfect answer, yes, I imagine that the lawyers are trying to think through that, but I think that there's a reliance on attribution science, both from emissions attribution and extreme weather attribution. So looking at how to what degree did climate change cause this specific impact or this specific event, and then you can say, take that one step further, how much of an impact did this company's emissions have on that?
Okay.
So that's a really circuitous answer. I hope that.
No, that actually is helpful because I've been like thinking like how do we divvy this all up. My other question is with regards to the insurance industry, which is and they're not the exact same companies, but you know the insurance industry is also very responsible for a lot of the fossil fuels in insuring fossil fuel projects. So to some degree, they have kind of fueled their own demise, I think. Um, so how do you how do you address that?
Yeah, oh, they definitely have. And one of the things we're trying to do, one of the areas we're exploring is we're trying to figure out how to get, because the insurance companies have so much data and they're also heavily invested in fossil fuels. So we're actually trying to figure out if there are ways that through legislation or otherwise that we can try and make some more transparency in that data because we would like to understand how thoroughly invested are these insurance companies in fossil fuels because then you have this like weird self-perpetuating crazy problem. We know they're invested, but we'd like to know how much because then it's
Right,
like, yeah, if you're investing and this is the thing that's causing the problem, and then you're asking everyday people to pay for it, like that's
right, exactly.
yeah, and that feels like a really relatable narrative. Like if that were true and we could show it, that feels like it would just blow the roof off of this argument, one would hope.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's very helpful.
Damn.
Just trying to sort out the difference between the New York and Vermont cases where they created the climate superfund legislation to make the fossil fuel companies pay for damages versus the other strategies that you have talked about. And so I wondered for Illinois, what would you consider to be our highest priority strategies in addition to the lawsuit that we've already engaged in?
Yeah. Yeah, the so and the Superfund bills differ. So like the legislation that we have talked about here today, a lot of it is about litigation, right? It's about using the courts to hold these industry accountable. The Superfund bill is different, right? It's creating this fund to account to be able to pay for the fossil industry to pay into to then cover adaptation and other extreme weather. Just depends on how they formulated it. So it's all, I mean, in it from theory, it's all very similar. I would hesitate to make, a recommendation because I think that there's a place for sort of all of it, which is, I think, a little overwhelming to hear, but I think is true. Where the Superfund bills, at least though I wouldn't couldn't speak to what Illinois would do, but the ways in which they were written in other states, they're usually for the most part, with some differences, trying to account for um, um, a public, like damage to public infrastructure. So then you could take the private right of action and think, okay, we've got with via this lawsuit and the Superfund bill, we're really covering this damage to public infrastructure. And then let's also think about how we can take care of everyday people who've been harmed. So there is sort of like a jigsaw puzzle where these different things fit together. And at the same time, you have this insurance problem. So again, I feel like I'm giving a really dissatisfactory answer, but they do sort of jigsaw together. I think it would be what what is the thing that resonates the most with legislators, to be able to get passed? Is it that there's just so many instances of really direct harm and people aren't able to afford to maintain or shore up their homes? Or is it that, roads are being washed away and in flooding, and that would be more public infrastructure fixed? But all of them, including um, everything, all of them are at risk for being sued because that's what this administration has decided to do. So like it's all it's all a risk, but they're gonna come after us no matter what. So
Isla, does the private right of action bill for Illinois cover make people whole for insurance losses?
it has so not no. But it does have, we kind of snuck in some language, not snuck in, it's just a small part of the bill has some language around insurance subrogation, which would be allowing the insurers to sue to recover losses so they wouldn't raise rates. Um, but it's not, yeah, it's kind of separate from the individual private right of action that's in there. If it were to be insurance focused, we would definitely need to like expand the language for sure.
We have a hand up over here, Susan.
Yeah, I understand and I support this. It sounds like it makes a lot of sense, but I do have some questions from an economics perspective, and that is that assuming that this would be successful, the price of oil would go up. And that would be, of course, a good thing, but there would be an impact. The wealthy people could basically afford to try to, to buy electric cars and purchase their way out of using oil, which would be good incentive for them. The poor people would suffer because, what do? You can't afford heating oil anymore. So I don't know if looked that far down the road, if anyone's thought about that, but it's certainly something I'm curious about.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's also like the industry loves to threaten that, right? Like that's like we get that a lot of like, well, we're just gonna have to raise prices. And the reality is they don't because their profits are just so astronomically gargantuan that when you do the math on it, like they don't actually have to raise costs. They're, but that is what they'll say, and it's also that's it works. People, that's one of the biggest arguments we had against the insurance bill in California, and it turned out, that was a scary opposition to go against. I think there's the like reality of it, which is that it's not really the way that gas prices specifically are like that's really a global market issue. Not like, the city of Chicago is not going to set global gas prices, but it doesn't matter, right? Because like that's the pushback that's going to be out there. So I guess I'm answering a different question, which is how do you respond to pushback like that? But your question is really, but some of this will inevitably happen and it will screw over those who are least able to deal with it. And no, it's a really good question. I mean, the biggest things that we have been just to try to think through is the policy itself and like what can we put in there to be creative so that there is no price gouging or try to show that this is price gouging when a company does this. So I don't think we've found that perfect solution. And, my dream is that like if you're going to pass something like this, that simultaneously you're also passing a lot of different other bills that make access to, electric vehicles more affordable. And so that all of this is happening in unison, but it won't, right? Because that's not how policy works. So I don't know. We need to figure that out, I think.
Well,
A
also,
lot of different policies.
I guess really when it comes right down to it, the other major issue is they can point right back, you know, you bought the oil that we
Oh, yeah.
made, so why are you blaming us now? And of course they're going to argue that. So, I think, obviously that's another big issue they're going to come up with that basically you have to defend and say you lied, but um,
Well,
uh, go ahead. I'm
No,
just,
and I mean, through the blocking of climate policy, right? They've basically created an economy in which we are all have been completely dependent on their products. Had they not lied and manipulated our politics since the 1980s, we could be living in a really different world. And I think that's sort of the narrative that we'd have to counter with, which is like, but we consume this because you gave us no choice. And we can show that because all of those documents have been made available to the public. But it is not an easy argument to make, but it's certainly doable by lawyers much more equipped than I.
I think the other part of this communication strategy needs to be focused on the fact that, as we're all aware, um, because of the externalities of the fossil fuels, that people are already paying
Yes.
these external costs. And so, by uh, taking the money from fossil fuel companies, either through private right of action, climate super funds, or these lawsuits, you're making that cost more apparent. It's already there in, increased costs for healthcare, insurance, home insurance, um, the costs of pollution, and of course, extreme weather that comes with climate change. So I think that's, it's kind of on us to try to close that circle and show people that this is not something that they are or will be able to avoid.
Jeff, that's the perfect answer, I think. And it's actually the one that I'm like our communications director would have told me to answer it that way because it is true. That like that's what we're trying to do here, right? Is make sure that people aren't experiencing higher costs. Um, because yeah, we're already paying a giant oil and gas tax. It just looks a little different.
Yeah. So I just had one other question for Justin in particular. You talked about trying to get legislators to co-sponsor these bills. Where actually do they stand this year? Is this the quote education year? And they're going to end up getting introduced for real, I mean, to attempt to pass them next year? Or where are they now? Because I haven't heard IEC talk about them.
Right. Yeah, that's ultimately the goal, Pamela. This is our first year, and they were introduced, or we actually brought these bills to our respective sponsors, not, far from the actual commencement of the legislative session. So we were always going up against the clock this year. But moving forward, particularly in the off season, so July and beyond, is going to be a lot of education, a lot of grassroots and coalition building. And then the hope, not just from us, but our sponsors moving forward, is that we're ready to hit the ground running come January. So Senator Ellman this year, I'm sure you guys have heard of it. She has a big, um, uh, uh, I would say, wetlands bill that IAC is promoting and is one of their major priorities. Given, in the event that that is passed. Senator Ellman, would love to advance this bill, but also Representative Jimenez as well, who's been very, I wouldn't say aggressive, but very strategically impactful in connecting us with the entities and organizations that she's engaged with, particularly, again, the West Side Environmental Justice Alliance. So, we're on the ground floor. We have an infrastructure that is continually growing and strengthening, but we need all of you to help us out in that regard, so we can be in a position to advance this and present this not only to leadership, but even to the executive chamber in the early part of next session, or just throughout the entirety of next session.
And again, just so we can look at them in detail,
Mhm.
it's House Bill 3494.
Correct. House Bill
And
3594.
3594, sorry.
Yep. And then Senate Bill 1790. Identical, and what we call here in New York a same as.
Yeah. Because what I was just thinking about, how uh, Jeff, the team that he and I are on together, um, we have a legislative advocacy team that meets during the legislative session.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking that it would be good to work more closely with you as in the July and after period to try to get other groups to join in with us on these two bills.
Absolutely. That is music to our ears, Pamela, and we'll increasingly, or at least I will increasingly be on the ground whenever needed. Although it's some miles away, it is very evident to us, just hearing from, people inside and outside of the legislature. If you want to get something done in Illinois, you got to be on the ground. So looking forward to that July and August and beyond months. So,
Okay.
once we're engaged, well, we're engaged now. Once those that time comes, happy to connect with you. But our immediate, or at least my immediate engagement, will be with the West Side Environmental Justice Alliance, and then expanding from there.
John, I see you have a hand up.
So just to clarify exactly what you've asked, so is it too early for us to be contacting our state reps and state senator about this bill? Should we hold off, or is this fine to start the conversation?
So, Isla, you can correct or definitely override me here. But at least from where I'm standing, it is never too early to make legislators or grassroots organizers aware of a bill. That is separate from the success we might see this year, which is none. But if they hear about it now, rather than August, that'll buy us, some influence and some time. So, just being very transparent and very clear about where the bill is, about its reality this session, I think is important. But to answer you directly, John, it is never too early to advocate for said bill.
So this could be a climate reality action item for the whole membership when we send our weekly
Yeah.
items. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's totally correct, Justin. And I think because like the ideal thing is even though it's not moving, like it's gone for this session, if a legislator gets contacted by, a few people and they're all like, hey, we'd love you to co-sponsor this. And then they're like, huh, what is this bill? And then they go to Rep Jimenez, like that's only going to embolden Rep Jimenez to so like we want these legislators because we know that they have a ton of priorities and bills and we want them to do all of it. But, we definitely want them to work these bills themselves in addition to all the advocacy that we will provide separately. We should figure out, the bill numbers might change between now and next year, but I'm not for certain on that. And for now, they exist as these numbers. So
I'm sorry, Tom, you were going
Yeah,
to
so
say?
excuse me. So we're down to our last 5 minutes because we normally end at 7:15. So let's make good use of the time. Any other questions?
Yeah. Any other questions? I can certainly commit to working with our legislative team, and I'm sure Jeff and I will want to work on this with
Yeah.
whatever team members we can gather over the summer and the fall to try to get this in a better position in January. I guess, the reason that the legislation feels more promising to me is just because the lawsuits take so long. I mean, I don't know how long it will take for this decision to be made here on our Chicago lawsuit, but didn't it take the tobacco groups that were trying to sue the industry like, I don't know, a decade or roughly 7 to 10 years before they were able to win the lawsuit against tobacco? It seemed like, and I'm just worried that, with all the incredible damages we're already seeing, that waiting 7 to 10 years for any action by the courts is just maybe too long.
yeah, it's a good point. The good news is that the first lawsuits were filed in 2017, so we're already kind of halfway through the timeline. So the idea, hopefully, is that any lawsuit like these first will go, and that now, this courts will be a little more seasoned. This is just new. They don't know quite how to handle these cases. So we're hoping that as more are filed and more start to go to trial, that it's faster. But I kind of think it does speak to just we want to do it all because we don't want to forego the lawsuit option because that's probably going to really most dramatically shift their behavior. But you're totally right in that they take a long time. So what can we do in the meantime on the legislative side? And also, they're going to fight that too, and that's going to be caught up in litigation. So it is sort of like what, and so then what can we do at the municipal level? Like it's all of these things, the battles that we have to fight at once. And I think they want us to be tired. They want us to feel overwhelmed by all this. And so I think it does speaks to we have to attack it from every single side, and hope that something so that we come out of this with one of these solutions working.
Is there anything we should do? My last question is on the immunity thing that is at the federal level right now. Is there anything that our chapter members should be doing?
Yes, that is a good question because that is honestly the most immediate thing that is actively happening. One of the best things I think because presumably you are all or most of you residents of Chicago. So one of the best things you can do is contact your member of Congress and specifically say we want to protect Chicago's lawsuit. Use that because you just have such a good hook being where you are that there is a lawsuit and that these members of Congress should be acting in service to protect that lawsuit. So I think that's one of the most immediate things. I just think the more they hear from their constituents about the fact that, hey, we actually know that there's a lawsuit and we support it because not everyone knows. That I think would be the most immediate thing. Um, and
Okay.
in some of my follow-up materials too, I'll send some information on that as well, just so you have a little bit more context walking into that.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm gonna drop my
Sounds like, yeah. Well, anything else, Jeff, before we close out the meeting?
I just want to make one comment that I saw from a man who's on the supervisory board of Allianz. It's a Swiss insurer, and he said that climate change is simply making some things uninsurable. The math breaks down, the premiums required exceed what people or companies can pay. Entire regions are becoming uninsurable. At that point, the financial sector as we know it ceases to function, and with it, capitalism as we know it ceases to be viable. So there is hope.
Okay. I want to thank Isla and Justin, for and you, Jeff, for organizing this. Certainly a lot for us to think about and to get going on.
Thank you all
So,
so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
We'll
thank
invite
you.
you back for plastic.
Yes, and I'll bring our real plastics experts.